The Arizona Coyotes have been a pleasant surprise to most people as they get off to a better than expected start. Robyn Leano of Locked On Coyotes joins us to explain how they got it done and the impact of Clayton Keller, all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can find us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Coyotes, Robyn Leano. And Robyn, the Coyotes are a pleasant surprise to a lot of people this year. Why? How are they doing this?
You know, they've just been making all the right moves lately. I think it goes back to the offseason and picking up some of the players that they did. I want to go back kind of essentially, I think, to the trade for Sean Durzi, for example. Like, I think a lot of people gave them a little bit of praise for it, but they were still like not given enough credit for it. But he's been an integral part to the Coyotes defense ever since he's joined the team. And just overall, this team has looks like they're having a lot of fun out there. I was at practice last Monday, and even despite that, coming back from the weekend, having lost over the weekend, they still look like they're having fun on the ice, and they're just having great chemistry. And I think that's a really key part to having a good hockey team.
It definitely does help. And look, we've been talking over the last couple of years, whenever you've been on the show, that this team was putting together a lot of draft picks, a lot of young players. And now we're seeing some of those young players start to pay dividends. How important have those players been to the success of this team?
Oh, they've been fantastic. Logan Cooley, for example, has easily been one of the top rookies in the league. He just over the weekend on Saturday night, he got a 3-assist night. So he's consistently being impressed. And yeah, sure, he'll go through nights where he doesn't show, but that every player does. And I think you'd be foolish to, if anyone, every Coyotes found that out there, to expect him to score or to get any points every night.
Yeah, no question about that. Talk to me about Clayton Keller. I mean, he has been red hot to start the season. What does he bring to the table for this team?
Yeah, Keller is just, I think he's that cornerstone piece for the Arizona Coyotes. He's that piece that no matter what, I think everyone's talked like, oh, what are you going to what is it going to take to trade for Clayton Keller? That's not going to happen. I feel like he's such that cornerstone piece. It's a piece that brings the team together. And I think that's one of the main things that when it comes to that chemistry, I feel like he's that cornerstone piece for that. I think that kind of helps with his performance and everybody else's performance on the ice.
The power play has been clicking at a very high rate, top 10 in the league right now. What have they been doing so successfully that's helped the power play click?
I think it's a lot has to do with getting the lines right. I think there's still a little tweaking to do on that lines, but I believe the top power play line you have Clayton Keller alongside Logan Cooley. I think that's like, you put those two players together, something's going to happen. I personally and my co-host Matthew Jacobson will back me up on this, as he said multiple times in the show, would like to see Logan Cooley on the second power play unit. That way that it kind of adds to, hey, he gets his own unit and he's able to actually be the guy and score more. But hey, right now, if it's, you can't, don't fix what's not broke.
Absolutely. There aren't a lot of household names nationally on this Coyotes team. Give our viewers and our listeners an idea of some players that they should look at next time they watch the Coyotes that they may not be familiar with.
I mean, I think it goes to some of the players on the defense. I mean, the players that people recognize that just have been underrated on some of their former teams. You know, Dumba and Dursey have been integral pieces to the Arizona Coyotes. Juuso Välimäki has been a fantastic addition to the Arizona Coyotes defense, and I think he's I think he's been great. Someone that not very many people even know about, and there's not much really I can say outside of that. I mean, because there's so much. It's like a lot of these players are just adding so much depth to the team, and I think that's the most important part.
No doubt about that. How about the goaltending? What are your thoughts so far? Because it seems like when Connor Ingram is in, they win, and yet his numbers are roughly comparable to Vejmelka's numbers. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think the coaching staff is doing a phenomenal job on making sure that each goalie is getting a fair number of starts and making sure they get their rest when they need it, which is a huge breath of fresh air when I compare it to the previous coaching regime. Previous coaching regime, after they got down to their third string goaltender because their top two are injured, and they start that third string 10 straight or 12 straight games in a row. And then eventually that player gets injured because guess what? You can't do that. So it's a breath of fresh air, getting a healthy mix in there, making sure every goalie gets their reps. And it's nice too. It's his perfect tandem. I think Connor Ingram's been fantastic, as a great tandem to Vejmelka. And I feel like that's kind of a team that's going to help them, take some wins and steal some wins.
So what is the one thing you think this team needs to improve the most to sort of take it to the next level?
So yeah, Matthew and I have talked about this on our show multiple times, and it's a team that needs to play a full 60 minutes and needs to learn how to play with the lead. A lot of the wins that they've had, minus the Chicago win, because that's a very different kind of game that they were playing there. But a lot of the times that they've won, they've played from behind to start, or they've had some kind of adversity to overthrow. This is a team that just cannot play with the lead for some reason. I'm going to go ahead and turn to a game against the Los Angeles Kings when they were up a decent amount. They were up like 3-1 or 4-1, whatever it was. They blow that lead and take a loss. Same thing with I think even a little bit to the Kraken, if I'm not mistaken, if that was another game. But it's a team that just having those problems playing with the lead, and I feel like they can overcome those, but it's a young team, so you can only expect so much.
Do you think that this team can be in the playoff hunt or maybe even sneak into the playoffs this year based on the start? Can they sustain it?
Yeah, another thing we've talked about is whether or not that's the case. We've said multiple times on the show, and I've even told you, but kind of going into the season, that this team will flirt with the playoff spot. That this team is going to be kind of like around there. Maybe they'll have a few weeks, maybe a month in the playoff position, but maybe not make it. My personal belief has changed a little bit, rather than my co-host. I think this team has the tools to maybe barely sneak it in. I think this team could potentially make it in at that second wild card spot, based off what I'm seeing right now. And again, that's saying barely sneak it in. It's like, don't be surprised if they do. Be pleasantly surprised if they do, but don't be surprised if they don't.
All right. Well, it's certainly a much more interesting season than a lot of people expected before we got started. Robyn, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Yeah, you can find our podcast everywhere you get your podcasts. Also on the Sirius XM radio app, if anyone's a Sirius XM subscriber. Also, you can find us ad-free on Amazon Music. You can. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have want to listen on there as well. Social media, we're on X at LO_Coyotes, and I'm personally at Robyn with the Y _Leano.
All right, Robyn, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Your favorite player could score 50 goals. Your team could hoist the Stanley Cup. And you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, Crosby, or McKinnon will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, NHL fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.